Okay, great. So thanks everyone for joining us this morning for the first Rules Advisory Committee meeting for the Drinking Water Source Protection Grant Program at OWEB. So I think what we'll do is start off with a round of introductions for the RAC members and OWEB staff who are on the Zoom today. We do have a handful and maybe some additional observers will pop in and out, interested parties listening in to understand some of what we're discussing in terms of the development of administrative rules for the new program. And then we do have some space for public comment. So let's do introductions, and then what we'll do is pop up the PowerPoint to run through the agenda, and then we'll do an icebreaker, I think, maybe before we pop up the agenda, just to have folks orient a little bit. So I'll kick it off. I'm Renee Davis, the Acquisitions and Special Programs Manager at the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, or OWEB. And I'll turn it over next to, I'll probably just go around my screen and ask folks for introductions. So we'll start with OWEB staff. So Rachel, do you want to go next?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Rachel Thompson. I'm the post-fire recovery specialist at OWEB, so I coordinate the post-fire programs here, but I'm also assisting with the RAC setup for this new program at OWEB. And I will pass it over to Eric Hartstein.
Great. Thanks, Rachel, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us and being a part of our Rulemaking Advisory Committee. It's really important to OWEB. My name is Eric Hartstein. I'm the Senior Policy Coordinator at OWEB, and I will pass it over to Robin.
Morning, everyone. I'm Robin Meacher. I am the Conservation Easement Specialist with the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program at OWEB. And so I primarily work on bringing acquisitions through that program, and am working and supporting Renee on the RAC as well.
Great, thanks. And we are missing Jessie Kirshner, who's OWEB's Water and Climate Coordinator. She is ill today, not able to join us, but has been a really integral part of the team starting to stand up the program. So we'll move to RAC members next. So let's go next to Dan Brown.
Good morning, everybody. Excited to be here. I am Dan Brown, and I work for the Environmental Protection Agency in the Region 10 office. I sit in our Oregon Operations Office, and I run our Northwest Forest Geographic Program.
Thanks, Dan. We'll go to Stephanie next.
Morning. I'm Stephanie Reed. I work for City of Lincoln City, the Public Works Director and City Engineer. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. We'll go to Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Harvey. I am the Drinking Water Protection Coordinator at Oregon DEQ. I work statewide and with the Oregon Health Authority, and sort of represent both DEQ and OHA on this team.
Thanks so much, Julie. Daniel?
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Weir. I'm a Forest Program Manager with Sustainable Northwest. Looking forward to working with everyone.
Thanks, Daniel. John Wickersham. And John, it's great to see you. For some reason, I thought you weren't able to join this meeting, so it's great to have you.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I am going to be out all of February, so this will be my first and last meeting for a little while. But hey, everybody, John Wickersham. I'm the Associate Director for North Coast Land Conservancy.
Great. And then we'll go to John Unger.
Yes, John Unger, Infrastructure Programs Manager with Business Oregon, and work with Julie Harvey and Oregon Health Authority and DEQ on some drinking water source protection work.
Great. And Steve?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Steve Graper. I'm the president of the Rhododendron Water Association up on the Western Lakes of Mount Hood. Glad to be here, and a little trepidatious because I've never been in something like this, but Melissa, our daughter, says that it's a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks for your willingness, Steve. We promise to make it as painless as possible with lots of support. So let's go to Michelle next.
Michelle Smith. I'm with the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts, and I'm the water project manager. And it's great to see this community gathered here. So thanks.
And then Gabby.
Hi, my name is Gabby Fajeda. I am a hydrogeologist with the Oregon Water Resources Department in the groundwater section. Thanks.
Great. So thanks to all of the RAC members who are here. I think that covers it. We really appreciate your willingness to serve on the committee. In any administrative rulemaking process, we couldn't do it without partners on the RAC, and certainly as we're scoping and standing up this new drinking water source protection program, the expertise and on the ground knowledge, technical expertise that each one of you brings is really important. We do have a few folks who weren't able to join us today. So Anne from Port Orford, who is the city council president, may be popping in and out today. She had planned to, but then an emergency meeting was called. So we hope to see her at some point. If not, though, we will be following up with her. And also Lori Bell from Oregon Department of Forestry, who's the Forest Land Assistance and Incentives Manager, is not able to join us until potentially later. Rachel, anyone else in terms of RAC members who I missed?
No, that's it.
Okay, so great turnout for this first meeting. And John Wickersham, we're glad we have you for this one. We know we'll miss you in February. So let's actually, this will be, we have a structured process, and because it's the first meeting of this group, we do want to spend some time just making sure you're well oriented to the intent of the new program, to a rulemaking process overall, and getting to know each other a little bit. So Eric Hartstein, I'm going to look to you as our rules coordinator. Are you comfortable with me going ahead and starting an icebreaker now, or should we run through the agenda first?
I am very comfortable with you starting an icebreaker, and I'm really curious what you're going to have in store for us.
Well, this was thanks to Jesse. So icebreakers are just an opportunity for us to get to know each other a little bit more, share something that's a bit more personal, and maybe have a laugh or a surprise or two out of things. So Jesse's suggestion was, when we were thinking about icebreakers, what was, I guess we can do it in two parts. What was either your favorite thing that you did over holiday and hopefully holiday break, hopefully you were able to take a little bit of time with friends and family, or the favorite thing that you ate or made during your holiday break? So Rachel, if you're comfortable, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I had a lot of family actually come visit from Illinois, which is where I am originally from and grew up. So we had family here, and it was a really busy but great 2 weeks. And I would say probably our favorite thing that we did was a New Year's sunrise coast trip, where we got to head out there and see a little bit of sun at the very first part of the morning, and then it progressively got cloudier as the day went on, but that's okay. It was still a great day. So I will pass it to Eric Hartstein.
Thanks, Rachel. So over the holidays, I think we were pretty fortunate. Nobody got sick, which was big this year. And we just hung out. It was great. Took a little bit of time off and got some stuff done around the house, and able to celebrate with family and friends, and pretty mellow and all around good time. So I'll pass it to Robin.
So I spent 10 days in California with my brother's family. So my niece and nephew, my niece is 3, my nephew is 1. And I'd say probably my favorite thing that I ate was their discards as they try new food, because it's really entertaining to watch. My family is a little bit aggressive with flavor, and so watching 2 small children try the things that we put in front of them is always fun to see what they pick up on and what they absolutely refuse. And then to avoid waste, we just eat what they give us. So it was pretty fun to watch that and participate in that for an extended time.
Thanks, Robin. I'll hop in, and then I'm happy to kick it to RAC members. So my in-laws were visiting from just outside of Boston for the holidays, 79 and 86 years old. And we had a fantastic visit out to Finley National Wildlife Refuge, saw lots of incredible species, including a very close flyby of a peregrine falcon. So that was really neat for them to see, to share with them, and just getting them out and seeing their abilities to still be out and enjoying nature in a fairly healthily engaged way at that age was super inspiring too. So I think I'll kick it to Julie Harvey next.
Sure. I grew up in Montana, so my mom and my brother were out here from there. It's easier sometimes for them to drive here than for us to go there. And as a new thing this year, we went to a Cirque du Soleil type show on Christmas Eve. And that was super fun. And I love watching just how muscular those people are and what they can do with their bodies. It's just fabulous. So that was a really fun way to kick off the holiday for us.
Nice.
Do you want me to pass it? I can
Yep,
pass
go for it.
to,
Yep.
I'll pass it to Dan Brown.
Well, first, a word of warning to Robin. I am with you wholeheartedly in the prevention of food waste department, but it is hazardous to your health to eat everything that young children don't eat. And I did a lot of eating and food waste prevention myself because there was so much good food over the holidays. And I got very uncomfortable and gained many pounds, and my cholesterol probably went up. And so the fun thing we did actually after the new year, we took 4 days with our kids who were home from college, and we went to Sedona and spent 4 days hiking around the Red Rocks, trying to burn off that excessive food. And with that, I will hand it to Stephanie.
Oh, goodness. Well, it was pretty uneventful. My family, my parents and my kids and their kids, so 4 generations, they all live in Oregon, and we met in my son's house. But I will say my food story, since you guys are talking about food stories, which I did lament before going. So with all my family's either vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free, I mean, there's the list, is really long. And so we have like these certain things that we bring. And so mine was salad sticks. Like I made like skewers only with pieces of salad stuff. But everyone, I mean, that's just how it is. So it was pretty funny. So I did not gain weight that day. But it was really fun to hang out with my kids and everyone. So that's very cool.
Excellent. Thanks, Stephanie. Let's jump to Steve.
Had to unmute there. Well, we have many holiday traditions. Melissa wants to make sure that we maintain all of our family traditions that start at Thanksgiving and go on until after Christmas. But the most important, since we're talking about food, is Christmas Eve. We had my wife's family over for my traditional stand rib roast and Yorkshire pudding. And then we had a fairly quiet Christmas, went to see a movie, The Boys in the Boat, on Christmas Day, because we're extending Christmas until this coming Saturday. Our daughter from Colorado and our 2 grandchildren are coming in, and so we've postponed Christmas and a big family ordeal for this coming Saturday, and so we're looking forward to that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. Let's go to Gabby.
Let's see. I had a fairly quiet holiday season. I was a bit sick, so my favorite thing that I did was a lot of sleep. Lots of sleep and rest.
Hopefully you're feeling better now. Let's see. Let's go to Daniel.
Yeah, I had a nice holiday season. I'm a pretty avid skier, specifically a cross-country skier, so it's been a little bit worrisome since the Cascades have been pretty light in their snow level. But Christmas or New Year's Eve, I was able to get out with some friends and do a day skiing, and I didn't destroy my skis, which was nice. I can still use them for the year, and it's an exciting start. And obviously now everything's getting nice and cold and snowy. So I would say a kickoff to the winter really felt right on the last day of 2023.
Nice, thank you. John Unger.
So on New Year's Day, I went to Silver Creek Falls early in the morning and hiked all the falls, which I'd never done before. And that was, you know, physically somewhat challenging. Had a new pair of hiking boots, which was nice. And that was exciting. Weather was beautiful. And then we have a little pizza oven. I got a little pizza oven for my birthday. It's also in December. And I've been practicing my pizza recipes. And so I wowed the family with some homemade pizzas. And the key is to keep the toppings minimum with this pizza oven. And so that was wonderful. It was a wonderful holiday, and now I'm but back to work, including the drinking water source protection RAC here.
Thanks, John. Michelle.
I was also on the sick wagon, so right through the holidays. So I did the sleep, but I'm always grateful for kind of our virtual world because I was carried around by a phone with my family's Christmas and watched them open all the presents, and so that was kind of fun. So I was there virtually, and I don't feel like that would have been something we did 3 or 4 years ago. So it was nice to participate, but I was in bed and toasty and warm, and so that's a good way to do it sometimes, I guess.
Thanks, Michelle. And then John Wickersham.
Yeah, I had a great staycation over the holidays, which was nice. Lots of friends and family time and lots of beach walks, and was able to do several things I've been neglecting, like clean out my garage. So it was a productive and nice break over the holidays.
Excellent. Thanks everyone for sharing that. It's nice to just have a little glimpse into some of the things that fill you in the non-work space. So we appreciate you sharing those holiday experiences, food and activity or rest. So I think with that, and I'll keep checking in with Eric Hartstein to just make sure we're on track with the required components, but I think now we can jump over to a screen share of the PowerPoint, and we'll walk through the agenda. So I think, Rachel, if you could jump us to slide 2.
Yeah.
And folks, at any point, if you have questions throughout, I know when screen share is happening, it's a little hard to see everyone. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll be trying to track that in terms of keeping an eye on any of those hand raise functions that may be happening. If we happen to miss something though, and you have a question for RAC members, just please chime in and let us know that you have a question, because want to make sure that we cover the material, but get any clarifying questions answered at the right time. So we don't miss an opportunity. So in terms of the agenda for today, obviously we've already walked through the welcome and introductions. We'll do some background about House Bill 2010 and the intent of the drinking water source protection as described in the legislation. So I'll provide some of that bill background and then quick overview of the OWEB board's initiation of the rulemaking process. And then Eric Hartstein will go a little bit more deeply into what is the role of all of you as RAC members and how does the rulemaking process work. And I think probably at least a handful of you have likely not been on RACs before, and that is fantastic. We will make sure that you're up to speed on the process, you have the necessary support to plug in a way that feels productive and constructive to you. So we'll make sure that you have a good understanding and grounding today in what that process looks like. We'll take a quick break because we know virtual meetings can be a lot to take in. So we'll take a break. Before then, we dig into the draft rule language discussion. One piece I want to mention, and I think, this is probably signaled in the note that Rachel sent out about this first meeting. So because this is a new program and a new funding source that we'll be utilizing for the bulk of this program, from OWEB's perspective, we are in a bit of an iterative process to gather information about things like use of lottery bond funding, new property interest considerations that might be relevant for this program. So we will absolutely be in an iterative process in terms of the draft rule language. So today we'll talk through what we are anticipating in terms of the headers for the different sections of the administrative rules for the program. We'll dig a bit more into a couple of those sections, but no, at each meeting we will have incrementally more substance to chew on for the full rule set. We'll take a break after we start talking through the draft rule language, and then we'll have some time for public comment, both review of the 2 written comments that we received, but also we have some observers on the Zoom here. And so in the event that anyone wants to provide oral public comment, we'll do that in that 11:30 to 11:45 slot. And then we'll talk about next steps, including upcoming meetings, and then wrap up for the day by noon. So Eric Hartstein, Rachel, anything else you want to add in terms of the agenda review? Yep, Julie, go ahead.
Just quick question. Is there a shared drive or a shared place where maybe like this presentation and others will be stored for later review? Just wondering about like, how much notes do I need to take?
Yeah, that's a great question. Eric, are all of these posted on the RAC webpage?
If it's not posted now, it will be posted
After
the meeting. Yeah, but we don't
Okay.
have a shared drive set up quite yet for these processes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Julie. And same for the recording. In the event, for example, RAC members are not able to participate today, they'll have access to the recording, and just folks who are interested in learning more about the program and the process will be able to access that recording of this Zoom too. Okay, so if no other questions, or Eric, nothing else to add, let's jump to the background. So I'll try to move through this fairly quickly, and if you have questions, clarifying questions, raise your hand. I referenced House Bill 2010, which was passed during the 2023 legislative session. It did direct OWEB to establish a new source water protection land acquisition grant program. 2 different bills, both House Bill 2010 and then a separate bill focused more on lottery bond funding, allocated a total of $5 million for this program at the outset. So $1 million in general fund, $4 million in lottery revenue bonds. And I mentioned a bit earlier, a new fund source for the agency. OWEB has never administered lottery bond funding. So this is a learning process for us, and we are really thankful for some of our colleagues, for example, at Business Oregon and Water Resources Department, as we work through what this means for us. It is involving a fair amount of coordination with the Department of Administrative Services, so we understand completely what the requirements of that different funding source are, and then also some of the realities, if you will. So this, you see the parenthetical on this slide. So spring of 2025 is when the bond sale will occur. So as we're thinking through stand up of the program, when funds will be accessible, those are some new considerations for us as an agency. House Bill 2010 also did provide funding for a 0.88 FTE. It's basically a reduced number of months for this biennium for a natural resources specialist to help administer the source water program at OWEB. We're in the midst, we've just made an offer as part of that position. So we hope to have that person, or we expect to have that person on board in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, we've had a team of staff working on it. So I think, let's see, in terms of bill language, yes, thanks, Rachel. So the bill specifically talks about the program providing grants to water suppliers to protect, restore, enhance sources of drinking water but through specific actions, and this really grounds us in the land acquisition aspect of the program. So you see the 3 sub-bullets here. So acquiring lands from willing sellers. This is a voluntary program. This is not a required regulatory program, but acquiring lands that will benefit a source of drinking water used by a particular water supplier. Similarly, entering into covenants, easements, or similar agreements to overlay some protections on particular pieces of land if they're not outright acquisitions. And then in the event that someone, a water provider has, for example, acquired lands or entered into an agreement, there is the space to repay loans used to finance a project that gets at those particular intents. So you'll see kind of that 3-prong approach for the potential protection of source water areas as defined in House Bill 2010. I think, Rachel, let's go to the next slide. Perfect. So there are some specific, very specific components that are articulated in House Bill 2010. So one referencing both the definition of water supplier and water systems that are in existing statute, and you see the statutory reference there. Also recognizing within House Bill 2010 that a water supplier may develop a partnership with a holder as defined under a separate statute. And so, for example, that might be working with a local land trust as a holder for a particular property interest that would get at that protection of source water. So I think creating some space for some creative and important partnership opportunities, but still acknowledging the water supplier focus for the program. And then the bill does specifically state that grants may not exceed $3 million. This is something we will want to be talking with the RAC about because we recognize that at the outset we have a total of $5 million in funding for the entire program. And so they cannot be above 3 million, but we'll want to talk through what is that right number. Do we want to contemplate a cap that maybe is lower than that, given the need and demand in different geographies? There's also reference to a rolling basis for grant making. So we'll be kind of working through relative to how OWEB structures its grant offerings and individual grant cycles, how that would play out. And then Rachel, do you want to jump to the next? Perfect. Then there are some kind of nuts and bolts things that you'll see again as we move through rulemaking. So specifically stating in House Bill 2010 that the form of the grant application will be prescribed by the OWEB board. So basically giving us the space through rulemaking to determine how is it that we want to receive grant applications, what will be the content required of applicants to the program, with a specific mention though of applicants must provide documented evidence that a proposed project would meet this intent of source water protection outlined in House Bill 2010. It does specifically also talk about the agency embarking on rulemaking. So that's why we're all here now to address a host of different topics and components of the program. So what will the review process structure look like? How will ranking be utilized as the agency is evaluating projects? And what are those evaluation criteria? Eligibility criteria for folks to engage with the program. So defining the specific water system types that would be eligible. There also is language in the bill that calls out this program is intended to address drinking water source protection needs in rural areas and in areas of specified income levels or population characteristics. So I guess the way I've been thinking about this is not intended for, say, the Portland or the Eugene world. This is really around what are some of those needs in rural areas, in lower or more economically challenged areas, or in smaller population communities in various locations around the state. Rulemaking also should address any requirements for grant applications and process. So connecting back up to that first bullet above, and then should contemplate any requirements around matching funds for applicants to be eligible to come into the program. And then I think, yeah, so this is the last slide in terms of some of the details from House Bill 2010. Some really important language in terms of verification processes that would be utilized so that OWEB is certain that the funds provided through these grants are meeting the intended purpose. So some examples provided in the legislation are status reports from grantees, other verification methods or documentation that property is being protected or that certain actions are being taken to protect source water areas, and then also development of long-term management plans by water suppliers and partners that they're working with on the project. A few other important, especially I think from the OWEB perspective, but also I think full transparency for folks coming into the program, is that the language in the bill specifically states that the grant recipient is responsible for fulfilling the terms and conditions of any agreement to get at that source water program. So that's really getting at some liability protection generically for OWEB in the event that a grant recipient fails to fulfill those terms and conditions of an agreement that is put in place to protect a source water area. And then a final note, which we'll be tracking closely as agency staff, is there is a legislative reporting requirement for the agency so that we keep the legislature updated about essentially progress under the program, demand that exists on the ground, funding that has been allocated, status of funded projects, etc. So let's see, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide, Rachel, if you would. Okay, so I think with that, let's go back to the previous one. So let's pause and see one, Eric Hartstein, anything in terms of bill language that we should touch on for the RAC members.
No, I think you got it, Renee.
Okay. And then
I got a question.
Yep, thanks, Dan. That was a lot.
Sorry.
And I talked quickly. So maybe, Rachel, how about we stop screen share for now, just in the event we're talking through some clarifying questions. Dan, go ahead.
Just a clarifying question on the matching. Is that discretionary, or did the bill actually require some level of matching?
The bill does not
Discretionary.
require a level of match. What
Okay.
we have to do as an agency is be clear what, if any, match requirement exists. And that will be an important topic of conversation with this group.
Thank you.
Yep. Other clarifying questions, given the amount of information that just came at you? Okay. So then with that, thank you, Rachel, for sharing. All right, so we'll jump to this draft schedule slide. So in late July of 23, we did request that the OWEB board authorize initiation of rulemaking because our board is the grant decision maker for the agency. Anything that has to do with grant related rulemaking, obviously they have approval authority over and ultimately adoption authority for rulemaking. So at that point, when Eric Hartstein was describing the anticipated cadence for rulemaking, we proposed this particular schedule with the set of tasks that you see. So working with the RAC in winter and spring of 2024, hence 5 meetings on your calendar between now and April. And then there are a number of steps, which Eric will talk a little bit more about, that are formally related with any agency administrative rulemaking process. So, you go through a final iterative process to develop the draft rules, and then you work with Secretary of State to file notice, to post public comment materials, make sure we're completing the required notifications that are outlined in rule and the APA manual for agencies, and have a 1-month public comment period, including a public hearing for any administrative rulemaking, both adoption of new rules or revision of existing rules. And then based on that public input, potentially having some revisions to respond to the topics raised during public comment, and then finally presenting the proposed final rules for adoption by our board in July of 2024. We are optimistic that we'll meet this timeline, and because this is a new program and we are working through some iterative things like coordination with Department of Administrative Services on bond funding, coordination with Department of Justice on considerations around both bond funding and property interests. We may have to revise this, but we are going to do our best to meet this timeline. And then from there, once we have adopted rules, we would subsequently be setting the schedule for what the grant cycles would look like, timing wise, and keeping in mind the bond sale timing that I mentioned in spring of 25 for actually having accessibility and availability of the $4 million in funding. So I think I'll pause there. Eric, Rachel, anything to add in terms of rulemaking schedule? Okay, and then any questions from RAC members before I hand it over to Eric Hartstein to talk more specifically about how a RAC process and rulemaking works?
I'll ask one more question, Renee, because
Yep.
that's kind of what I do.
Yep.
For just looking at the table here, it appears, and I just want to double check this, that the RAC is not re-engaged in the revision process. Is that the case? OWEB staff handles any revisions based on public comments.
That's correct. And Eric
Okay.
Hartstein, can you talk about what, if any, kind of updates occur to the RAC following the public comment period?
Yeah, typically when we get those formal public comments and potentially revise the rules based on those comments, we will alert the RAC as to what has changed. In the past, we haven't needed to come back and pull the RAC together. That option does exist if need be. So it kind of put a dent in our timeline here if that were the case, but we don't anticipate needing to pull the RAC together again after receiving public comment and revising the rules.
Great, thanks.
Other questions? All right, Eric Hartstein.
Great. Yeah, thanks,
Thanks.
Renee. Yeah, and Renee, I don't remember being quite that specific when we actually went to the board with that timeline. So looks like April 8th is going to be a very busy day for OWEB. I'll cover a little bit more on the kind of the role of the RAC and a little bit more on rulemaking context. Steve mentioned earlier in discussion with his daughter Melissa that participating on a RAC is fun, and I have to say that really warms my heart because I think it's a pretty cool process myself, and I hope you all will agree as we move through, and that it's a little bit of agency sausage making, but it's kind of cool to be a part of. So just to kick things off, so we do have a definition for an Oregon administrative rule, which is any agency directive, standard, regulation, or statement of general applicability that implements, interprets, or prescribes law or policy, or that describes the procedure or practice of any agency. So that is the formal definition of an administrative rule in Oregon. And next slide, please, Rachel. So for our purposes here at OWEB, our administrative rules are used to interpret statute, to describe the solicitation, review, funding decisions, and administration of our grant programs. One question that comes up quite often is, does every grant program at OWEB have a separate administrative rule? And the answer is almost. So those grant programs that do not are operated under the broad umbrella OWEB grant program rules, which are found in Division 5. You'll hear more about Division 5 rules here a little bit later today. And those will be really important as we develop the rules for the Drinking Water Source Protection Grant Program, as Division 5 forms the umbrella under which this grant program's rules will fall. So how does OWEB make administrative rules? So first, and we have this in the timeline here, the OWEB board initiates rulemaking if existing rules need to be amended or new rules need to be developed, as is the case with this program. Staff will then form a rulemaking advisory committee to help develop the rule language and ultimately bring it back to the board for consideration and adoption of that rule language. For the RAC composition, OWEB seeks to have members that represent the interests of the persons we think are most likely to be impacted by the rules. So hence the makeup of our committee today. So what the RAC does is really serve as an advisory body to OWEB, really helping us frame up the policy choices and providing advice on that rule language as we get things developed. I'll say that while OWEB retains the ultimate rulemaking authority, we really strive to achieve consensus in this process. And we'll be looking to the RAC members for that language and kind of build consensus on the final language as we wrap things up. So one area that we definitely would like the RAC's assistance on is in fiscal and economic impacts of the proposed rules. So when we develop the notification of proposed rulemaking following the RAC process and these meetings, and once we have the draft language in place, we'll need to include a statement of fiscal impact, identifying state agencies, units of local governments, and the public that may be economically affected by the rules, and an estimate of that economic impact. So as an agency that provides voluntary natural resource, watershed, conservation-oriented grants, we typically don't associate our rules with having a negative fiscal impact on any of those bodies that I mentioned. But we'd still like to ask the RAC to identify any areas where you see where any of these rules might have a negative fiscal impact. So just something to keep in mind as we go through this process. Actually, Richard, yeah. So in addition, as a part of the economic impact to the public, we need to consider the economic effects of the proposed rules on businesses. And the way that small business is defined is corporation, partnership, sole proprietorship, or other legal entity formed for the purpose of making a profit, which is independently owned and operated from all other businesses and which has 50 or fewer employees. So with that definition, small businesses are not eligible for OWEB grants. So we generally aren't dealing directly with small businesses through our grant programs, which is where our grantees typically engage with the small businesses. But we know this program is a little bit different. So, and there's a new direction for us. So again, we would like the RAC's assistance in keeping impacts to small businesses in mind as we develop the rule language. And John, I see your hand up.
Yeah, related to small businesses, I guess, there is some water systems that are privately owned that could be considered small businesses. And so they, depending on where you go with the applicant eligibility piece, there could be, this could actually be available to small businesses, but, generally speaking, it's, a negative impact to small businesses. That's generally what we're looking at here. And I would be very surprised if there was with this wonderful program. And so, but just wanted to make that clarifying point that the nature of the borrowers could span municipal entities or private entities, depending on what's eligible under the guidelines.
Yeah, thanks, John. That's really helpful insights. And yeah, we don't anticipate there's going to be any negative impacts, but it's great to know that we might have more of a direct relationship here in this grant program with small businesses than in other grant programs. Okay. And then for public engagement, so during the RAC meetings, there's opportunities for public comment. We have both written and verbal. Rachel sent out a couple of written comments that came in advance of this meeting yesterday. So thank you, Rachel. And we'll try to do that in advance of each RAC meeting as the public comments come in. We typically have the due date for public comment at least a day ahead of the RAC meeting. So I'll give you 24 hours or so to chew on any written comments that come in advance of the RAC meetings. And then a little bit later in this meeting, we'll have an opportunity for any verbal public comments. So if there's folks online today that wish to provide verbal comments, we'll have a few minutes set aside for that as well. Renee mentioned earlier the formal public comment period that follows the draft rules that will be developed through this RAC process. So we'll have the virtual public hearing later this spring, as well as opportunities for written comment on the draft rules. Typically what we've seen is most of the comments come in that written comment period. You don't get a lot of folks wanting to come on to the public virtual hearing to provide verbal comment, but that's okay. Regardless of whether we get either verbal or written comments, we as staff will summarize all of that comment that comes in and then respond to those comments, whether that was reflected in any revisions to the draft language or not. And so we'll have a document that gets put together, and that actually will go before the OWEB board when we ask for the rules to be adopted as well later this year. And finally, we do have some other engagement opportunities. I think we can go to the next slide here. And I don't know, Renee, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the current outreach that is involved.
Yeah.
Grant program.
Yeah, happy to, Eric. Thanks for that. So knowing that we are a very well experienced granting agency, and we are not the subject matter experts on drinking water considerations per se. We absolutely want to make sure, one, we're leveraging all of the expertise we have on this RAC, but also doing our best to reach out, make sure that organizations, entities, individual providers, individual potential partner organizations are aware of the development of the new program, and also providing insights, learning from what some of those experiences on the ground have been. So we've initiated outreach with the Oregon Association of Water Utilities, League of Oregon Cities, Special Districts Association of Oregon. Also, we've had presence here and there at and Julie, I'm going to ask you to help me get the name right, but the coastal drinking water protection workshops that are sponsored by DEQ, OHA, COLT, maybe NCLC. Julie, who am I forgetting in that?
Well, Sustainable Northwest has been really involved in those, as well as LDEC, the local agency economic development agency out of Lincoln City.
Okay, thank you. And knowing that those have been focused in coastal communities to date. Obviously, great information though in terms of potential need, and also some case studies to bring to bear on this. So both Rachel and Robin are intending to engage in the upcoming workshops that are, I think all of them are in February.
Yeah.
And then just if you have suggestions, we've been doing some outreach via kind of OWEB standing meetings with conservation organizations, agriculture, and other kind of land use interest groups. But if any of you have suggestions on groups that we should be connecting with to get information out, to get information from, please let us know, because we do think that public engagement is critical to the rule development, the rule making process, but then also just understanding, thanks Anna for that, understanding too what some of that need and demand is, because we will, I'm certain, be in front of the legislature multiple times talking about both progress, but also what we're seeing as needs on the ground. So I want to make sure we're plugged into that. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I just, speaking about the breadth of outreach targets, I think it's, that you mentioned agriculture, which I think is excellent. I guess the piece of forestry interests would be one that might be good to be proactive about. I think the bill may say something about, and I haven't studied in depth, but about willing sellers. And so in that case, it should be, totally fine. But I know that if there's the opportunity to kind of engage prior to the public comment period for the final rules, it might, be a good engagement, because I know that some of the forest practice issues are probably related to, at least in the coast range, have been related to some tricky water concerns. And so that's just the extent to which that's an option, but all the partners, SDAO, OAW, absolutely. It's just that the transactional nature of this new program, and that it may involve, taking, forest management aspects, may warrant some engagement there.
Yep, thanks. Great suggestion, John. Appreciate that. Eric Hartstein, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks. I think we're actually due for yeah, there we go. Due for our first break. We are just about on time.
So with 1 minute, and we can use more than that if needed. Any questions about the rulemaking process, or just any follow-up questions from what you heard this morning, knowing that we'll come back after 15 minutes and you can ask questions then too, but any burning questions you want to get on the table now? Okay, hearing none. Rachel, thanks for restarting the timer after I threw things off there. So we'll reconvene at around 10:09 to dig into draft rule headers, a little background on Division 5. But yes, take a break, get tea and water. We'll see you soon. Right, everyone's ready to get back at it. Camera's on with 10 seconds to spare. All right. Okay, hopefully you were able to stretch and get away from the monitor for a bit. So we're going to spend the next hour plus starting to talk through draft rule language. And I would say, please manage your expectations, because one, we'll be focusing in terms of more comprehensive discussion on draft rule headers, so different sections within the administrative rules that we're expecting that we would likely develop. In a few instances, we'll dive a bit more deeply into a couple areas that we feel as though, one, it's important to get on the RAC's radar to start to get your input about, and ones where it's a bit more straightforward. There are some other instances, and I mentioned this previously, where we are still awaiting some feedback, for example, on some of the specifics around bond funding and how we need to be thinking about that maybe differently than we have when other fund sources are used to support grant programs. Again, iterating with Department of Justice on consideration of property interests that would be eligible under the program, and just what are any kind of requirements, for example, that or considerations that we might want to account for related to those. And so there will be additional information coming at you iteratively, but we would like to take an opportunity to kind of put the full set of anticipated draft rule headers in front of you, because as you know, we think about this from a staff perspective. Again, you all are the subject matter experts. Julie Harvey is going to know a lot more about different water system considerations than OWEB staff. Daniel, John, others, I think Stephanie is a great example in terms of local water providers or partners who are thinking about developing projects like this. You're going to have a better handle on, Michelle, what are those property interests that folks are actually contemplating. Steve has examples of how they've handled it in the rhododendron instance. And so just giving you a flavor for the whole set of rule headers so that you can be thinking about how your experiences, how your technical expertise can help inform how the build out essentially of those different sections of the rule. So a few different things that I want to just flag up front that we're kind of thinking through with the funding as one example. And John Unger, you have a lot of experience with this, given bond funding. There are instances of allowable and unallowable costs related to bond funding. There are limitations on reimbursement timeframes for things. And so that's where we as a funder are needing to think through, what are those realities and sideboards? How do we best account for those and leverage the $1 million in general fund that we do have in some cases? It may be that we need to develop a bit of a bifurcated process within the rules to account for maybe different allowable activities for projects that we utilize the general fund versus lottery bond. So some of those things are what we're still iterating on in terms of background. In terms of property interests, recognizing that we do, for example, have a land acquisition grant program already in place. We can draw on that a lot, but there may be other property interests and associated legal instruments that need to be brought to bear in this program. And so just determining how much can we leverage what we know from land acquisition grant making, what we know from Oregon Ag Heritage that Robin is our easement expert on. How can we draw from that, but then recognize there may need to be space for some different instruments to get at source water protection. So more to come on those topics, but wanted to give you a sense of some of the background that we're doing. We really are, and you'll see this in some of what we'll share out in terms of the rule headers, working to leverage to the degree possible both where we have existing and useful content for administrative rules, and you'll see that in particular with some of the sections we'll show you, but also leveraging where our partner agencies have thought through and noodled on some of these topics. So for example, OHA and DEQ, as they're thinking through some questions around water suppliers, water systems, how do we get at the requirement in House Bill 2010 for rural communities of certain population sizes or economic or income levels? Where can we leverage what we've already seen built out by our sister agencies, but in a way that does not misrepresent the intent of this bill? So I think I'll pause there with the framing. Eric Hartstein, Robin, Rachel, anything to add before we go to some of the Division 5 background for folks? Okay. All right, and then I guess just with that framing, any questions from RAC members before we go into more of the grounding in our Division 5 rules and the draft rule headers? Okay, Eric Hartstein.
Thanks, Renee. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see what we call our headers here. So this is all online. This is OWEB's administrative rule set. So if you're ever curious, you can go onto the Oregon Secretary of State's website and pull these up yourself. I've highlighted or pulled down the accordion for the Division 5 for the OWEB grant program rules. And we mentioned these earlier, and they're really important as they are the umbrella rule set for all of OWEB's grant programs. So the headers that you see here, starting with purpose, these will apply to all of OWEB's grant programs. If there is conflict in a different division, so for example, if there's a conflict in the Division 10 with Division 5, we'll specify that in the rules unique to that grant program. And usually what holds out is that the unique rule set will apply. But we try to make things pretty streamlined and simple so that really what happens is the grant-specific administrative rules just tier off of these broad headers. So we've got purpose, definitions. These will apply to the Drinking Water Source Protection Grant Program. These purpose definitions will have a purpose and definitions section specific to these rules, which we'll get into here in a little bit. Application requirements, processing. This is pretty standard. What happens when we both solicit for and receive grant applications. We have standard process. Again, there might be unique ways in which this program differs from our standard grant program, but if not, the Division 5 rules will apply. The climate-related evaluation criteria, this is new. The board adopted these evaluation criteria in July, and they apply to all of OWEB's grant programs. So we'll be sure to touch on that when we get into evaluation criteria as the RAC process develops, and we have language for you all to chew on. Grant agreement conditions, distribution of funds, pretty standard, but again, there may be some differences here with this grant program that may result in some changes in the specific division through this rule set. And then finally, we have a option for a waiver of rules, so that allows our director in rare circumstances to waive rules if it results in a more effective, efficient grant program, not typically something that happens, but does on occasion. And then just opportunity for OWEB staff and the board to review the rules on a fairly regular basis. So I will stop screen sharing and see if there's any questions on the Division 5 and those rule headers, as we call them.
Michelle?
Yeah, Michelle.
I'm thinking, I'm trying to like remember the OWEB grant rules, but I know in some cases, so a restoration grant will have grant application requirements. Is OWEB's, is it if there aren't specific rules that supersede or expressly preempt the Division 5 ones, that we should assume those Division 5 rules will be integrated, and so we need to be really specific in these rules where Division 5 rules won't be applying.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm thinking about how specific you have to be.
Exactly, Michelle. That if we're silent here, then the Division 5 rules will apply. There's a good way of thinking of it.
Yeah, that's a great question, Michelle. And I think that is helpful food for thought for us about as we're getting into some of the more detailed rule language under these headers for this program, continuing to put before you as the RAC, the Division 5 content, just so we can be assured that there aren't any areas that just have slipped through the cracks where there could end up being conflict or at least kind of unhelpful expectations from those Division 5 rules. Any other questions? John?
Yeah, so I guess I'm not tracking entirely. So you have a division of rules that that set some certain parameters that all the grants must follow, and unless we explicitly describe something on the contrary in this new set of rules, we would have to defer to that other thing that may very well not work for drinking water source protection. And so is there a crosswalk? Like how would we go about I guess what's the thought? So is that true? And then how do we, as somebody that's not familiar with the Division 5 rules, how would we assist in ascertaining whether or not that's an issue?
Yeah, so it's a great question, John. The Division 5 rules are the umbrella, so these will fall under that. A lot of what's in Division 5, and I didn't go into super great detail there, is pretty boilerplate on kind of solicitation, just kind of how OWEB runs a grant program, which a lot of that, if not all, would apply, I think, to this grant program. There's things like evaluation criteria is going to be a big one, or eligibility, that are going to be very unique to this grant program. That aside from the climate related evaluation criteria, Division 5 doesn't really get into all that much. So we'll be sure as staff to do that crosswalk, but like Renee said, we'll probably be bringing up the Division 5 rules as we go into the language development for these rules as well, just to make sure that we're not being duplicative, making sure we have a good streamlined process here, but also calling out those areas where, hey, this Division 5 rule doesn't make a lot of sense for this particular program. So we're going to make sure we have some revised language to better address this particular issue. Does that help, John?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, Rachel, would you be willing to screen share at, is that slide 19? Okay, perfect. So we want to give you a sense, as I mentioned, of comprehensively what we are anticipating that the rule headers would look like. Since you saw Division 5, you saw some of those kind of subheads underneath. And we reserve the right to say, we forgot something, as we're iterating with all of you on content for the drinking water source protection rules. And then for a couple of these, which I'll mention in a moment, we're going to spend a little bit more time on them today. So we'll start off with basic purpose. And in many ways, we can kind of refer back to examples and processes for both our land acquisition grants and our Oregon Agricultural Heritage grants. About you want to articulate within the division of rules specific to this program what the intent, the specific purpose is, because this is different or more focused, if you will, than other OWEB granting. So we want to be clear on the purpose. Also want to be clear on the definition. So any definitions that have not already been captured in Division 5 rules, we would absolutely want to capture here. And some of those, we have just kind of a running list of ideas. We will probably want to define the Community Drinking Water Enhancement and Protection Fund, which is the fund that holds the resources for funding this program. We would maybe want to define things like management plan, since a long-term management plan is referenced in statute. Talking specifically about definitions for certain property interests that are eligible within the program, water system. So we'll make sure that anything related to this program is clearly defined here. And that could be a fairly lengthy list, given that this is a new program that has, you know, a related but slightly different intent than some of OWEB's granting. Could you jump to the next slide, Rachel? Okay, so I asked her to go to that because we do want to spend a little bit of time with you today on starting to talk through eligibility and application requirements. I know that only 2 of these bullets are highlighted, and that might feel as though, wow, we're really just scratching the surface, but these are ones that are not inconsequential, one, so we want to have the RAC to start chewing on those. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. There are a set of these other bullets that, frankly, we will be able to draw heavily from in terms of our existing divisions of rules for other programs. So let's start with eligibility. So if you, Rachel, could jump down, perfect. So there are a couple pieces in terms of eligible entities or eligible applicants. And we actually did pose a question to Department of Justice around this in terms of the eligible applicants as described in House Bill 2010. The focus really is on water suppliers, and the definition of water suppliers is elsewhere in Oregon statute. There is mention in the House bill of a water supplier being able to develop a partnership with a holder, for example, a land trust, but not only a land trust. So in terms of the eligible applicants, that will be pretty straightforward for this program. Where we will want to spend some time with all of you is in the event that a water supplier as an eligible applicant is intending to develop a partnership with a holder that could help address some of those long-term management needs. We'll want you to help us articulate for the rule set, what are some of the expectations that you would want to put on how that partnership is structured, what the capacity expectations are. And so we wanted to get that piece on your radar. Also, the bill does specifically describe that in rule, there's a definition of water systems writ large in the state, but that we can focus that eligibility in rulemaking on certain types of water systems. And so wanting to make sure that we spend some time with all of you, are there system types that are a better fit for this, given the rural nature, the lower income community requirement, the population requirement? Are there particular system types that we should be looking at? And we absolutely, and I've already started to do this some with Julie and her counterpart at OHA, want to be able to leverage expertise from other agencies on this and thinking through how do we focus eligibility as appropriate. And so I think I'll pause there. Maybe just if you could take a look at this slide closely, because I think I'd like to stop screen share and give an opportunity, maybe Julie, for you to talk a little bit about some of the water system issues, or maybe for Michelle or Daniel or John to talk through some of the partnership experiences that they've had working with water suppliers, just to begin to have some grounding in the eligible entities part of the rules. So Julie, not to put you on the spot,
Do you
but
want me to start? Yeah.
that'd be great.
So first of all, I guess I would say that within federal rule that Oregon has adopted, there are different water system types, which I think most people on this call are probably familiar with, but let me highlight them to make sure that we're all clear. So community water systems serve more than 25 people year round. And these are all defined in our OARs, under OHA's rules. So we can easily pull definitions for all of these. But community water systems are sort of the base that serve, more than 25 people year round. So remember, that can be anybody from a mobile home community or a really small community all the way up to City of Portland, City of Eugene. The other one that we typically will tie into these types of programs are called, it's an awful term under the federal rules, non-transient, non-community water systems, which are basically ones that serve more than 25, but not full time. So it would be things like schools, work sites, ones where people are drinking the water, but not necessarily 24/7, but on a very regular basis. And in our programs for source water protection at DEQ and OHA, we typically include those non-transient, non-communities because of that public health risk and the level of the types of ones that are included in that. And then we have transient non-communities, which are things like rest areas, restaurants where people don't drink. They might drink the water once or twice, and then they're gone from the area. And then Oregon has its own special designation of Oregon Very Small Water Systems, which serve more than 10 people. Might have to actually go back to that and make sure. OVS serve 4 to 14 service connections used by 10 to 24 people. So under that federally recognized 25 people, but these are typically communities as well. So, and then I think the second step is that under the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, that OHA specifically includes community water systems and transient water systems that are basically not for-profit organizations. So either publicly owned or not a business or something that is a for-profit organization. And personally, I think that's probably a fairly good guidance to start the discussion with here. That to me, like schools and those types of transient systems are a community that as a state, we want to, help protect, but both the businesses are sort of assumed to have their own resources to deal with things. The other thing that the drinking water SRF specifically excludes is federally owned public water systems. So that's probably a consideration as well when we're talking about sort of who's in and who's out in the pot of eligibility. And I would say the last piece is those Oregon Very Small systems, that because they do serve Oregon communities, we may want to consider if they're included, recognizing at the same time that many of those have very limited capacity to apply to the program. We probably won't see a lot of those, but think it's important to consider them in that whole eligibility question. So that's just sort of an overview. And then I don't know how you want to delve into that side of things further.
Thanks, Julie. John, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Julie, for the overview. and very accurate, I think, from my understanding. So I guess we do have existing drinking water source protection. Julie and Tom Petit, Oregon Health Authority work on it. It has a set of eligibilities that are defined by the Environmental Protection Agency. So those are federally defined eligibilities. And so it might be one other way to look at it is what, in addition to, are all those, it's assumed that all those eligibilities would still be eligible. And then would there be other eligibilities like the very small systems that would be incorporated? And then the other piece is, population thresholds, oftentimes, 10,000 populations used as a threshold, but if there's population considerations that are put into place as well as far as the number of patrons served. And so I think it gets complicated. It's non-transient, but it is. Oregon Health Authority has a webpage. They have a database where all of these systems are on here. So I'd heavily recommend utilizing Oregon Health Authority's database to identify those entities, because those are the ones that, the work's already done. We don't have to recreate the wheel, but whether or not there's the deviation from the federal programming eligibilities, which could very well be a good point, that should be considered. And then, as I described, other population considerations or rural versus, metro. So those are all my initial thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. And I think that a couple things. One, there will be a narrowing funnel as we stack different eligibility requirements. And so I think the key for this piece of the conversation is, how do we not inadvertently exclude a particular type of water system that should be eligible? There are other questions that will come up around capacity, for example, to actually carry out a project. But I think just taking each one of these kind of individually, and the next slide, I think John was giving us a little bit of a glance forward, is some of those requirements around rural, around income level, around population. Those will be additional eligibility considerations that ultimately will stack. So Julie and then John.
Yeah, I got one more thing to add specifically on that is that there are tribally held water systems in Oregon. However, Oregon does not regulate those. Those are done in partnership with EPA. So we don't have a lot of information on them, but that is definitely something we should consider, is how do we incorporate tribal water systems as part of this state funded grant program that's different from the federal authorities.
Thanks, Julie. John?
So I agree. I mean, tribally, Warm Springs comes to mind. There might be a couple more in the state of tribally owned water systems, and it's just absolutely eligible under the DWRF. Yes, we don't regulate them, but it's just such an important key stakeholder. So I'd 100% agree with Julie on that. The piece I forgot to mention as part of I didn't take my notes properly, is the entities other than, because wasn't the question of entities other than the water system themselves serving as the applicant? Was that one of the questions? Or are we not there yet? Or
it's not a question, given that
it's in the bill.
The direction that we received from Department of Justice, given the language in the bill, is that the water supplier would be the applicant. They could establish a partnership with a holder. And so that, I think it's that partnership, the characteristics and nature of that partnership. So if I think about, for example, some of what NCLC has done with local jurisdictions, what would some of the eligibility or criteria be for that partnership? But it would not be that NCLC comes in as the applicant in this case, given it would need to be the water supplier.
Okay, that's helpful. And I guess the takeaway that based on our experiences, there's times when there's some strong folks driving a project forward, but the community leadership themselves are ambivalent or not engaged like they need to be. And so that would just be a piece where I don't know how you remedy that, but that's a piece where the water system themselves should be, yes, this is part of our plan, and yes, we're engaged, but the partners could be the means by which they have the capacity to do it. And so it all sounds great. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, great question. Michelle?
I'm trying to think through the benefits of, and wondering for OWEB if any of your programs, when you set them up, have thought about this, of really restricting eligibility instead of using kind of those other criteria to break out or prioritize projects. And I guess as I've worked in this area, each system is so unique. And so there may be some very small water systems that would really benefit from source water protection. And so excluding those just based on categories seems maybe the program will miss some areas that would really benefit from some of this funding, particularly where there's a partner that can support them. And I know we're not quite there yet, but I'll just throw that out as something that I'm kind of thinking over of where the best place is to kind of prioritize those. And if it's excluding eligibility, if that's the right spot to be really restrictive.
Yeah, agreed, Michelle. And I would say that we probably tend to cast a broad net in terms of eligibility. And then as a proposed project will go through the review and evaluation process, considering the connection to different evaluation criteria. But I think especially with this program, we probably should not contemplate being overly limiting because we don't know what the future holds for this program. There could be more significant investment to get at some of those very real needs on the ground that you described. But Eric Hartstein and Robin in particular, just any feedback relative to existing kind of traditional OWEB grant programs or OAHP, Robin, for you?
I don't have much to add. I think the eligibility, like Michelle mentioned, you can look at it from both ways. It is how we typically treat that first review before we even review the applications, is determining whether they're eligible to apply to the program. So I do think there needs to be that balance between using it as kind of a filter if we're going to be relying on the rest of the application as a way to determine whether it's a good fit for the program. So it is that kind of like first look.
A couple of things that have been mentioned in terms of eligibility. One is this topic of for-profit systems. And so that's something that we will absolutely want to think through with the RAC. And then Julie and John both mentioned tribal held systems. And so absolutely, I think from an eligibility standpoint, we would want to be as open as possible on that front. Dan, I'm not sure if from kind of the EPA perspective, given that that is where the tribal system nexus is, if you have any insights to share on that topic.
Not directly, but certainly I can check in with staff here that deal with the tribal water system. And this would be in the context of sort of coming up with specifications and the eligibility criteria that would be inclusive of them. So like a federal definition for a tribal water system. Yeah. Yep. I think I'm tracking and I think I know what you're asking. And so I'll just have to bump that into the right crew here.
Okay, great. So then the other topic from this particular section before we move into eligible communities is just, I think, putting a pin in some of the characteristics and criteria that ultimately we would want to build out related to that partnership concept where a water supplier would work with an eligible holder under ORS 271 to get at some of those capacity or experience needs. And so certainly I think folks like Daniel, Stephanie, Michelle, John, who have been in the thick of some of those projects will want to draw on your experiences about what makes those partnerships work, what types of characteristics would you want to incorporate into evaluation criteria, but just anything now that you would want to share with the group based on your experiences from those partnerships of a nonprofit holder working with a water supplier. Daniel?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I reflect a lot of what Michelle said. It's important that there is a varied opportunity based on like what partnerships shake out as. And one of the things that is really helpful is when there's partners that come in with like that are able to support a long-term vision, right? So kind of some of the characteristics, maybe it's not the specific water district who has put out, the forest management plan or the water supply plan, but the fact that they're able to get resources and have an example of what that long-term goal looks like. Even if it's, not, it certainly would be signed off on by those water districts, but not necessarily as produced. But really what we've seen as being important is the water districts or water suppliers coming forward with the, what's our 50-year, 100-year goal stated before, any major steps get taken.
Thanks, Daniel. Michelle?
I'm going to defer to John for some of the specific partnership pieces. I think he'll have a lot to add on that. I just wanted to ask a clarifying point. This seems really specific as to the situation where not the water supplier will own and hold the property, either the interest or in fee, versus, and this is a question I have, a water supplier, and we haven't gotten here, is there funding available within the acquiring lands to partner with a nonprofit like a land trust to support the water supplier in acquiring the property that they will hold, the water supplier? So I guess I'm drawing a distinction of, is this conversation just where the land trust, for example, will own the property in long-term or the interest, versus where are there opportunities for this program to support a partnership of a land trust supporting the water supplier in purchasing and owning the property, the water supplier itself. So a little convoluted, but just want to clarify what we're talking about in terms of the program and the potential uses of the funding.
So I'm going to ask for help from other staff. I'll give my answer, but it may quickly be corrected. So I think currently, Michelle, we're thinking about this as potential for both. And I think we need to get clear on, given that the water supplier is the eligible applicant, I think what we have to understand is what would an agreement, some type of legal agreement look like to get at any expectations or requirements for the relationship between, for example, a water supplier and a land trust. But I'm going to stop there. And Robin, any additional feedback? And also Eric Hartstein, based on what we know at this point in terms of the property interest pieces.
I don't have really much to add on that currently.
Hartstein, anything more?
Not at this time, I don't think. Yeah, I think you covered it, Renee.
And one piece, and I will go to the two Johns. I don't think you were asking this question, Michelle, but I just want to make sure of it. As we look at House Bill 2010, this really is about the transaction. This is all that it takes to get to some type of protective transaction instrument agreement. This is not technical assistance funding, not to say that there couldn't be kind of support for what it takes to get to that transaction built in, but I would say this isn't kind of for that seed funding to do an assessment that is many years before the actual protective instrument. But John Wickersham and then John Unger.
Yeah, thanks, Renee. Well, one, I'll just start off by saying that NCLC always believes that if, when possible, that the management of the property should always be given to the local entity so that the local community can own and manage and make decisions about their drinking watershed. But in cases where that's not possible, I think it should be, an organization with a mission to preserve and protect natural resources that can prove or provide evidence that they have the ability for long-term management.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. And that does mesh well with some of the language that's in the bill in terms of some of that documented evidence. John Unger?
Yes, thank you. So I agree with you, Renee, that, from my brief look at the bill, it does speak to actually acquiring property as opposed to that pre-work. Now, there's other federal programming in place that could fund the pre-work that already exists. And I think it's been funding it, and I think that there's projects that are known, and that's really a good thing. I guess related to the land acquisition piece and just the land transaction, it's pretty complex, and it's the key. I think it's the most, in my opinion, it's probably the most impactful piece here to work through. And I don't know if it might be in some future RAC meeting for those of us that don't have the context about what transactions occur and what the bill specifically says. I think that that's going to be key to kind of understanding that as a RAC member. And I'm a little bit, I know that as we've worked with this body of work, OEB has more experience with land transactions and riparian protections, I'm assuming, but it was very complex legally, and having more insight into that world could help as we go down this path of developing understanding to whatever extent it's possible and realistic for OEB.
Yeah, thanks, John, for that flag. And so certainly I think we can tee something up, maybe asking Robin to help take the lead on that, but possibly pulling in a few of you for brief case studies. So Steve, if I think about the rhododendron example and maybe John, some of what NCLC's done, just to ground folks and kind of the what is this? What does it really look like? Okay, so go ahead, Michelle, and then I'm gonna move us.
And I just wanted to be to clarify kind of or make a comment about John, building off what you just said, kind of the importance I think I've seen for communities in having a land trust or other technical support for the actual transaction process, and the extent to which this funding, not kind of the planning or pre-planning, but can help support a partner time in that, I think is really important and invaluable. And so that, not technical capacity, I don't know how you want to frame that, but just to put that as a pin, and that having funding for that will be important no matter who the holder is.
Yep, thanks for that. And that certainly in terms of the uses of funding will come up in terms of the administrative rules. So Eric Hartstein, we have until 10:20 for this section, correct?
11:20, yeah.
Or sorry, 11:20. Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Let's, Rachel, jump to slides 22 and 23 and talk a little bit about eligible communities. So this is another piece in terms of kind of basic eligibility. And this language is specifically from House Bill 2010 in terms of serving rural communities, communities at lower incomes, experiencing lower incomes, or communities that are at or below a specific population level. That population level is not defined. Lower income is not defined. Rural communities is not defined per se by the bill. And this is a place where we, want to leverage existing definitions to the degree possible so that we're not reinventing the wheel and adding another layer of complexity if folks are trying to maybe pair up with other funding programs, whether it be state funding or federal funding. And I think we don't want to be overly limiting on any of these, knowing that evaluation criteria subsequently can get at some of those questions about how a project fares in the evaluation process. So could you, Rachel, go to the next slide? This is a little bit small, sorry. Is there a way to zoom it in a bit, Rachel? Yeah, perfect. Okay. So we've done a little bit of legwork with OHA, DEQ, I think the Environmental Justice Council, and then maybe DLCD or ODO, to start to compile here, how are some of these terms defined elsewhere? So you see some of the enumerated items are really around how we define rural, or how others have defined rural. That next reference to the EJ Council work is about, no solid definition yet of low income, but just kind of generally how the state has thought about low income communities. And then some feedback from the House Bill 4077 process about really creating space, I think, for folks to self-define how they believe they connect to those specific characteristics that are called out in the bill. So we wanted to share this with you. Again, this is an important piece that we'll need to be clear on around eligibility, but we don't intend to be overly limiting. So I'll stop there and see if folks, whether it's associated with a funding program that you're involved with, or other agency definitions, any thoughts or feedback on rural income population size. John.
Yeah, I just think the opportunity to self-define your socioeconomic status it's probably possibly problematic. I think the reason I say that is because the community that has the least capacity, that needs the most help, may not be able to say the right thing to say, hey, we really need this help. They may be the least, they may need it the most and be the least able to describe that. And so I guess I just, not to say that there's not circumstances that should be considered in the scoring methodology, that whatever you guys land on, but as far as, I think that not certainly having a large breadth, the fact is that these are geographically targeted things. There's a certain amount of them in the state. There's some real gains, and so by trying to dial in too tight with the whether MHI, whatever it may be, that may be challenging. And so I do think that there's a need to describe the need and describe some of the challenges the community faces. But as far as tying that to actual socioeconomic status, that could be somewhat controversial if the low capacity communities aren't able to articulate in a proper way.
Thanks, John. Go ahead, John, and then Julie.
Yeah, I don't know the best way to do this. We've started to see lots of these types of requirements pop up on the coast, and lots of these coastal communities are pretty small, and they have relatively affluent. I mean, there's lots of affluent people that own second homes here, and it starts to skew these types of metrics. And so we've been seeing that it's actually kicking out some of the coastal communities and eligibility of these things. And so I just start to get a little bit concerned when we're just trying to figure out the best way to balance these things, and just like to bring that up because that's something that we've started to see on the coast.
Yeah, super helpful to have that real world example. Julie?
Yeah, I was going to echo that as well, that there is also, in looking at environmental justice, there's the Justice 40 initiative that is federally recognized, but it is at the census tract level. And we have exactly seen that, where at a census tract level, because there's such a wide range in incomes, it does get skewed to that respect. I touched base with both Oregon Association of Water Utilities and Rural Community Assistance Corp. Those are two nonprofits that help water systems and wastewater systems throughout our state. They typically define rural as serving under 10,000 people. So, that's one piece in that. And I think that was one of the definitions that sort of came up there as well. But I think it's really important to sort of consider, like, who gets dropped out, and is that part of the state funding goals? Are we missing communities because of that?
Thanks, Julie. Stephanie, I probably should know this, but how would a 10,000 threshold work for your jurisdiction and maybe other comparable jurisdictions along the coast? Would it would it be falling through the cracks then?
We would, well, that number is funny in a bad way because at one point in the census, we were over 10. And so a lot of things kicked in and now we're like just under 10. So anyway, there's a question, but we're hovering at 10 population. Of course, there's, many ways to measure your, besides just population served. And so we have, these peak demands and second homes. And as John mentioned, this skew of people who can't afford to live here versus, the second homeowners and people who, and so, yeah, so our income's very skewed, but yet we have a lot of low income people that live here and on fixed income and stuff. So all of these criteria, I guess my question is, what I kind of like to know more about what is really the lay of the land and how do we measure up in terms of, if there's a whole lot more needs out there, we can't meet our goals on our own money for sure, but I don't know. I just, I don't want to be, I'm really ignorant. I know a lot of small water systems in Lincoln County. As terms of source water, I can't speak to all of them, but what I've heard, most of their problems are infrastructure. Newport is definitely over 10,000. But, it would capture most of the other smaller communities on the coast, the 10 would. At least in the central and southern coast that I'm familiar with more population-wise.
Okay. Julie, go ahead.
And one more thing to put a pin in that way is that there's the population of the city, which Stephanie, I think you're speaking of, but the water district serves more than that because you may serve within an urban growth boundary or may serve other areas. At least in OHA's database, it says that Lincoln City serves over 20,000 people.
Well,
So,
sorry. That is
help me with that.
an amalgamation of our peak in the summertime. We serve up to what we call 40,000 equivalent in the summertime, and then pretty low in the wintertime. So we do an average for our certain things, like our water, like our conservation plan and things. We sort of average out to get a number that that we land on. So yeah, so our service population is on average 20,000 over the whole course of a year. So that was what we went with. And, and like I say, maybe we are too big to be, maybe this grant is really intended for a lot smaller communities.
Okay, I think this conversation is so helpful as we think through the kind of 3 community characteristics that were called out without specific quantitative thresholds. And I think one, recognizing there are nuances to how you even do those counts. And Julie, like you raised census block, but Stephanie, what you just described, even such a complex consideration and one that we shouldn't gloss over. And I think also the importance, as I'm hearing this conversation, thinking through, these probably shouldn't be ands. It shouldn't be population and economic and rural. It may be ors. So we're not disproportionately limiting. But John, go ahead.
Yeah, it makes sense to do a little more research before just landing on a number. 10,000 is kind of arbitrary. I think EPA uses that number, but we have another water fund, the state funding source, that uses 15,000 or less as a criteria. So really, I don't know that there's a magic number per se. There is a rural urban breakdown. There's Business Oregon has different ways that we identify counties or cities as the challenge in some way. So I think that I wouldn't necessarily tie your criteria to another agency. That's sometimes challenging, but but I think there's a lot of different ways, and certainly understanding the kind of challenges ahead and then making sure that this funding isn't such that it precludes a large portion of those that will be facing challenges from accessing funds. I think ultimately gets down to the highest populations, city in Oregon probably has the resources to go out and buy a couple $100,000 piece of land to protect their watershed. That's small. And then on the flip side, the very small systems that Julie talks about, if they only have 4 or 5 people, and then you're paying $500,000 to protect their watershed, maybe it's worth it. But then again, it's not as, so I think it goes on both sides, that it is, what's the sweet spot and what's the need, and how can you best steward these state funds to make a significant impact?
All right, great. Thanks for that. So I'm doing a little bit of agenda adjustment on the fly here because we have about 15 minutes left. I do want to walk through the other rule headers. Rachel, thank you for your prompt about timing. But before we leave this topic of both kind of eligible applicants, the topic of the partnership characteristics, just early thinking, and these community considerations, anything else that anyone would like to either raise as, hey, OWEB staff, it would be great if you looked into this. And I think about, if you have interfaced with other funding programs, or if you have, Dan, if you're working with another funding program that you think we should take a look at for some reference, or just any experiences like having Stephanie's seasonal description there. Just, I think, Steve, for you in particular, just anything else that you think we should look into or be aware of as we're starting to frame up some of these eligibility considerations. And if not, it's okay.
Oh, I might just say that I know that the community forest grant program talks a little bit about eligibility for, I mean, you could cherry pick some of that language about for the partners portion of this, not the water district portion, but it outlines like what those requirements would be to be eligible to hold a community forest.
Yep, great. Thanks for that, John. And Dan Brown, did you have your hand up? I thought I saw another hand.
I took my mic off, and I was just going to say on the federal side, a lot of the funding for source water protection is administered by the state. So like Julie and John would have a much better grasp on the state rules. The federal allowances are often pretty broad, but oftentimes states sort of create their own rules about the administration of, for example, the SRF funds that can be used for source water protection. So I would defer to Julie and John for specifics on that.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. All right. So in the interest of time, Rachel, could we jump back to the slideshow? So we did have highlighted eligible properties. This is something where I included this as really an example of, to the degree possible, this is the language that's included in the eligible property section of the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program grant rules. We will point to either something that's kind of defined or justified in statute, or direct line back to House Bill 2010 to the maximum degree possible. So things like a source water area or a land area from which a particular water supplier draws their source water. So not making it overly complex. So I wanted to just highlight that we'll need to consider, eligible applicants, eligible communities, eligible properties, but not in a way that makes it just a morass for a potential applicant to navigate it, making it as straightforward as possible. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I give Julie a shout out for the source water areas, that there should be ideally be a reference to those actual defined areas that DEQ's been mapping out.
Yep, thanks for that. And I think with that in mind, one thing that we've started to noodle on too is surface water sourced areas may be a little bit clearer than groundwater sourced areas. And so determining how do we get at the two different potential water supply sources, and recognizing we have $5 million to start the program with. So first, Daniel, that elicited a lot of feedback. So Daniel, then Gabby, then Dan.
Yeah, I think that's like, Julie, that's great that you kind of already have such defined examples. One of the things we've heard from folks on the ground is looking at source water areas, but understanding that some of the sellers and the transactions, the current landowners might not want to break up the property and only sell the watershed. They might want to sell a larger swath of land. So making sure that like there's potential to have a fund that fits that and is easy to work with the sellers as well.
Thanks for that, Daniel. Super important. Gabby.
Yeah, just the distinction there in your source water and groundwater. I think one thing I'm not sure what you would want to point to, especially since we're undergoing our own upheaval of that and those definitions. But obviously, if there's an existing groundwater right that has an identified surface water body with potential for substantial interference, if it's hydraulically connected to a state and scenic waterway. So I think there are some existing definitions that would be within that groundwater right if a water system that would be used that are already known within our agency. So there's some stuff there that could be called on.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Gabby. Dan.
Yeah, I should probably talk to Julie before I throw this out there, but I'll throw it out there and she can react to it. And I don't know if this would play into eligibility, but DEQ, and I think with some help from OHA, they've done these water system assessments that look at the source water areas and often sort of identify potential risk factors of source areas. And so in a lot of cases, those source water assessments include sort of parcels that I believe would be the target for acquisition with this kind of funding. But Julie, correct me if I'm wrong on that, and whether or not that's a crazy thing to even think.
We have done sort of a general risk assessment, but certainly not down to the parcel level. And to me, that really comes in the scoring type process, not necessarily overall eligibility. I don't think we'd want to limit it within the rules. I think you would want to put that into a more flexible mechanism, such as the scoring for determining risk. But we have defined through the source water assessment program, which was something we were required to do under the Safe Drinking Water Act and under rules with EPA. Drinking water source areas for all, especially community and non-transient, non-community water systems. That for groundwater goes out to either the 10 or the 15-year time of travel, because that was a reasonable planning horizon. And for surface water includes the full watershed upstream of the intake.
Yeah, thanks for that. Really quick, John, before I go to you, what you just stated, Julie, about eligibility being different from evaluation criteria is so important. And we will make sure that we're using that funnel and not starting with a funnel that's way too narrow at initial eligibility.
Yeah.
John, go ahead.
Yes, I just groundwater is mentioned, and I just want to throw out there that what I've heard is that surface water is could be the most immediate need out there. Groundwater, oftentimes you're dealing with agricultural lands, you're dealing with huge areas of agricultural lands that are contributing to some aquifer contamination. So it might be pretty tough to wrap your arms around that. The cost of the land may be astronomically higher compared to forest land. And so I guess I just want to throw out there that I don't know that there's the desire to preclude groundwater, of course, protections, but I picture that most of the demand for this program would be surface water protection, those that use surface water sources, because there's that direct immediate impacts, whether it be from harvesting, whether it be from chemical use, and then you're seeing it in your drinking water right there. Where the groundwater is more insidious, it could take time to travel, and so I don't know if that's off base, but I just want to throw that out there, not to preclude any type, but that's what I envisioned.
Yeah, thanks, John. Michelle, and then John.
I think maybe that's a question for OEB to look at, and Julie, I'd be interested in your thoughts. Since surface water tends to be west side, there's a whole east side that relies on groundwater that I think in some cases kind of thinking about like a conservation easement as a tool to limit the type of ag uses that are immediately near a well site might have real benefits to protecting that community drinking water source from nitrates or other sort of agricultural runoff. I don't know that, I don't have the like hydrology background to know that, but I think that'd be an interesting question to think about. Kind of, is there opportunity there? To my mind, I've heard yes. And particularly thinking about how to make this program kind of accessible statewide, thinking about groundwater, particularly just given that east-west divide of where water sources are.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, for that very astute observation. I think this is one of those issues where we don't want to build a program with initial funding amount being a limitation out of the gates. And so I believe we would err on creating space that is broader, both surface and groundwater. And then we will need to overlay the realities of funding level and availability on that. But yes, that has that's given us pause without a doubt. John, go ahead.
Well, I agree with all that. I would just add that we're working with communities now on groundwater protection. So there are those projects out there now.
All right, that's great. I guess I would say we reserve the right as OWEB staff to follow up as we're digesting all of the feedback we're getting. We might follow up with individual ones of you to learn a little bit more about what you have flagged with either projects that are in development or some of the technical resources. So thanks in advance for your willingness on that. Rachel, I know we have 4 minutes left, so if you could just throw up, we'll skip this for now. If you could just go back, I think the next slide is the collection of rule headers. So perfect. Yeah, so again, just revisiting the draft rule headers here, recognizing, even though we really need to focus on eligibility, those are really big and important components of this rule set. We absolutely will get to these other pieces, and our hope / expectation is that at the next meeting, we will be coming to you with essentially straw person rule language for at least a significant subset of these. And we know that we will redline them together, but having something to chew on as a starting point will be important. Another really big chunk that we know we'll need to spend some time with you all on is that last bullet on the left-hand column, the application evaluation process and evaluation criteria, especially the criteria themselves. Because we want to make sure, to the degree possible, this program is not having water suppliers and communities falling through the cracks, and balancing that with making sure that there's sufficient capacity from an applicant organization to actually deliver on what the intent of the funding is, as outlined in House Bill 2010. So evaluation criteria are really important. Some of these other bullets that you'll see later, so things like grant reporting requirements, some of that will be associated with like the long-term management plan, that question of kind of liability, responsibility, and frankly, our legislative reporting requirements. Some pieces like compliance and enforcement, access, those are things that we know may be relevant in this program because of the property interest nature. And we have examples of that from Oregon Ag Heritage and our land acquisition grants, and knowing that we don't need to make them overly stringent, but we may need to speak to them because of public investment in a property interest. So I think just again, in the interest of time, Eric Hartstein, Rachel, Robin, anything else you would like to touch on related to the draft rule headers with the group for today's meeting?
No, I think this is a good start. Yeah, good discussion. Thank you all.
Robin, Rachel, anything?
I don't have anything.
Yeah, I think this is a good start.
Okay. All right, so thanks everyone for your willingness to jump right in on some of these eligibility topics. Really appreciate it. So we're slated for a break from 11:20 to 11:30. Then we'll come back and take a look at both of the written public comments that we received. And then Eric Hartstein, what is the process? Do folks just, any observers who are on, they just raise their hand if they want to make public comment? We come back at 11:30.
Yeah, and it might be good, and Dan, I see your hand raised. But if you are on the call right now and you do plan on providing verbal public comment, if you could raise your hand right now to give us a little idea if you plan on providing that verbal comment. Okay, so not seeing any hands raised, I think, well, we'll give another opportunity when we get back. Anna, I see your hand raised, so just here to listen. Great. We'll give another opportunity for verbal public comment when we come back from the break. If folks change their mind, but looks like we might just touch base on the two written.
Okay. And Dan Brown, did you have something before we go to break?
Yeah, just real quick, because I didn't know if I could get it in after the break. On the sort of use of the grant funding section in particular, I was hearing, or at least I think I was hearing some sort of distinction between, you know, some confinements around bond funding versus general funding. And so I think I heard concern. I don't know if it conflicts with what the intent of the legislation is, but I assume that in the use of the grant funding would have an opportunity to get some more insight on what that vibe is.
Yeah, and I can provide a 30-second synopsis because this is an important topic, and I believe why the proponents of the bill ended up with a mix of 80% bond and 20% general fund, because especially on that last bullet related to loan repayment for kind of transactions or agreements that are already in place, there are a lot of limitations on time frame with use of bond funding. And so that, I think, is where we will likely have to lean on general fund in those instances. And so as part of just better understanding the go, no go spaces, that's why we may need a slightly bifurcated path that acknowledges things that may be eligible uses for general fund that are not for lottery bond funding, so that it's clear to folks, we're not shutting you out, but we have to have kind of a two-track situation potentially. Does that help, Dan?
Yes. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll take a break until 11:30. We've got a couple of public comments to review written, and then I think maybe Anna Rankin for verbal, but we'll check that when we get back. Okay, thanks everyone. All right, welcome back, everyone. Eric Hartstein, can I turn it over to you for the public comment portion?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Renee. So we did receive 2 written comments. I want to thank both of the individuals that submitted those comments. Starting with Gary Young, who I'm going to just summarize these comments and then open it up if the RAC wants to discuss further. So Gary Young wrote and encouraged OWEB to adopt rules that included aquifer recharge and natural filtration of basins and floodplains as a priority. And then we had a written comment from Anna Linden with the Corbett Water District, providing some history on what has occurred within that area, as well as providing some eligibility / potential evaluation criteria for consideration as a part of the Drinking Water Source Protection Grant Program. So offer an opportunity for the RAC to give thoughts on these comments.
I'd just say they were very much appreciated and had some really good points in them. So thank you very much for sending those in.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, we concur, and we will be, I think, taking these under consideration as we're developing those straw person draft rules that Renee mentioned before the break. We did promise before the break to give another opportunity for verbal public comment, and I think I did see one hand go up. And Anna, I see your hand now. So,
hi, everybody. I made some notes, and so thank you for the opportunity to participate and listen and learn. I think that the number of people on the call today and in this discussion really represents the nature of the complexity of the discussion that we're having. I want to see the long-term success of the program. And this is where we can all agree. The Watershed Council and all of those beneficial uses of water, particularly in the pudding, I can tell you there's so much competition for water. And when we talk about drinking water, all of those elements start to melt away. And what I can also say is from the grassroots looking up, how do we build the partnership that is going to be sustainable and take on complexities in these rural areas? Pause. So I just submitted a proposal through the Drinking Water Providers Partnership, and it's pretty complex, and it really is focused on building that team that is needed to do the work. And so that is one of the questions that I would say, for the group to discuss is, if you want a strong team, what does that look like? And if you don't have experience, how do you get there to build that team? And so as far as the number around building in, what is that rural line as far as numbers? Silverton has 10,500 people. So I would hate to see Silverton excluded because of those extra 500 people. For sure, it's a perfect place for you guys to work, being right 25 minutes away from Salem, knowing that there's plenty of government employees who work in the city or live in the city of Silverton. So ultimately, you guys, again, just thank you. And I look forward to hearing how this evolves.
Great, thank you, Anna. And I also see Anna, the other Anna, you have your hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, we, in addition to the other written comments, just to comment on what was said today, the income requirements, the economic thresholds are pretty important to Corbett as well, as far as the disparity in our community. We have mansions, and then we have trailers and everything in between. See Steve nodding his head there. Yeah, so I wanted to add that and say, I think that having an or stipulation is probably the best thing for Oregon. So just wanted to throw that out. Thanks, everybody. And I hope I can attend more of these as a listener, learning a lot.
Great. Thank you, Anna. That's great.
And Eric, really quickly, I did see Jim Morgan, I think, joined at break. So Jim, because you weren't here before, if you are interested in verbal public comment, just raise your hand or turn on your camera and we can call on you if you're interested in providing comment.
Thank you. Anna just gave the comments I think were germane, but thank you for the opportunity.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, thanks to both Annas for your comment, your verbal comment, incredibly helpful. And as Eric said, we'll absolutely make sure that both written and verbal comment is kind of well integrated, one just in the awareness for the full RAC, but as appropriate, just trying to pull that information in as we're developing straw person rules. So Eric Hartsey, anything else related to the public comment?
No, just want to again reiterate a thanks for those that provided comment.
All right. So we're a few minutes ahead of schedule. Our intent with this time is really to kind of capture what have we heard, what's next, and what should you all be thinking about. And then I would, since we do have a couple minutes, it would be great to just, get any final observations from you, or, hey, please look into this, or I think this deserves a little bit more thorough treatment. But in terms of next steps from today, taking the great set of questions, suggestions, feedback that we got from all of you, doing some follow-up as appropriate on particular topics, starting to incorporate some of the feedback on eligibility, for example, into those straw person rules, and then really beginning to build out the straw person rules for those sections within the rule headers where we have enough feedback to safely do that. And so I keep putting that pin in around things like if there are remaining questions around bond funding, if there are any final questions around property interest, those may come more iteratively. But our hope is at the next meeting, which is the 9th of February, that we can put a significant set of draft rules in front of you to begin chewing on. And I think it's important to state, when we do that, it's not so that OWEB staff can kind of control the content of the rules that will drive this program. It's that in our experience, giving the RAC something to chew on and respond to is really helpful. So as I mentioned earlier, we will be doing a lot of collective redlining of things as you start to see information, but wanting to put something in front of you. And Eric Hartstein, can you give me a sense and help the RAC to understand how far in advance are those materials posted? Are they posted in advance or just post meeting? How does that work as we start to get into kind of the Word docs with the draft language?
Yeah, we try to get those materials posted to the website and provided to the RAC ahead of the meeting. Generally we try to get 5 to 7 days for that sort of material to give you all an opportunity to review, and folks that are interested in the public an opportunity to take a look and provide comment as well.
All right, thanks for that. Absolutely circling back on some of those important eligibility considerations, and then not to diminish the importance of the other sections of the rules, but we will really be starting to dig on evaluation criteria, because that will be very, very important for this program, to make sure that we are honoring the intent of House Bill 2010, and from a public grantor perspective, make sure that we have solid evaluation criteria that are not too great in number or overly burdensome, but yet will give us, I think, something to aim for as we're starting to think forward to what does convening a technical review team look like? How do we present grant recommendations to our board in the future? So evaluation criteria are critically important. And then, as I mentioned, we will likely be following up with multiple of you to get a little bit more information about some of the great feedback that you provided. For upcoming meetings, we start to get into a bit of a quick cadence. So our next meeting is February 9th, 9 to noon again. All of these are 9 to noon. Then just a few weeks later, February 27th, we know we'll miss you, John Wickersham, but if we can talk before or after for any feedback, that'd be great. And then Friday, March 15th. And then Thursday, April 4th, we went ahead and scheduled a 5th RAC meeting for this committee, given that this is a brand new rule set that we're developing for a brand new program. I would love to say we won't need it. My guess is that we will need it. Just to put finishing touches on things before we file with Secretary of State and hopefully stick to that schedule that we talked through earlier. So thanks in advance for your commitment of time. I know all of you are incredibly busy, and it is beyond helpful to have you on this committee to help us build this program. So Rachel, Eric, Hartstein, Robin, anything more on next steps? Hearing none. Okay, so we do have a, oh, go ahead, Julie.
Just a quick question on the evaluation criteria. When you put that into the rule, is it a summary of what types of evaluation criteria will be evaluated, or is it as detailed as a scoring sheet that would have, like, you know what I mean? Like, how detailed is that for the rule development versus what work gets done after that process? I just want to sort of have my thoughts together on like what level of detail might be needed for that conversation.
Yeah, thanks for that, Julie. And I'll say this so it gives them a couple seconds to prepare. I think I'll put Eric, Hartstein, and Robin on the spot a little bit because I think we have a couple different examples of how we've handled that. Hartstein, can you talk a little bit about the restoration grant rules?
Yeah. I mean, we try to get pretty specific when it comes to the evaluation criteria. We don't get down to the level of like a scoring rubric per se, but we usually have a set of evaluation criteria that each application will be evaluated on. If you go through our administrative rules, a lot of them are pretty broad. This is one area where we tend to get fairly specific, because this is kind of where a lot of the meat comes when you talk about grant programs. This is how our applications going to be evaluated and ultimately awarded. So we spend a lot of time on the evaluation criteria.
Yes, Steve, go ahead.
I'm in closing, as we're getting close to this, just the one comment that I want to make, and Anna reminded me of this, and it's the complexity of the rules that sometimes could be a barrier to some of us in the smaller systems from going after some of the grant funding. And so, coming from a small system perspective, as we go through the rulemaking process, simple is better. And we don't want to overwhelm the small systems with a series of rules that are either not understandable or are difficult to obtain. And so that's just the one thing that I would like to move out there is let's keep it simple. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Steve. And a couple of things. One, the rules are a critical part, and they are one part of our stand-up of grant programs. And so we do try to have companion guidance so that it is clear what are folks supposed to be aiming for. We try to do trainings, and especially that is critically important for new programs. Just with some of the post-fire recovery programs that we did, making sure that as we're launching programs, folks have some resources of what does this mean? I'm not exactly sure how to interpret this. And then the importance of having staff to just respond to questions. And that does not diminish the importance of less complex is helpful, given the diversity of systems for this program. John, go ahead.
Sorry. One outstanding piece that was on my list is just how we didn't really get into application requirements, but whether appraisals for property acquisition will be part of the application requirements, and whether there's any instance under which a grant would be provided for transactions that exceed the fair market value. And so that's a piece that just to with a limited amount of funding, wanting to make sure that it goes as far as possible. That's something was on our radar.
Thanks, John. And this is where the benefit of having both land acquisition and Oregon Ag Heritage Program to give some experiences of, for example, the appraisal piece. I would say just full transparency in terms of full fair market value. In no instance have we been able to pay above the appraised value for something with public funds. And that is true both in kind of our land acquisition programs, but also water acquisition valuation for water rights. Yep. So any other final observations, questions, things that we can do better next time, given that this is our first RAC meeting for this process? Open to any and all feedback. Okay. And open to any and all feedback holds with a call and an email afterwards too. So really, really appreciate your time today. OWEB team, any final comments for the group? Okay, seeing none. So more to come. We will be in touch with draft straw person rules before the next meeting on February 9th. If you have any questions, follow-ups, concerns, feel free to reach out to any of the 4 OWEB folks on this call. Again, just deeply, deeply grateful for your willingness to embark on this rulemaking process with us as we learn how to use a new funding source for a program that is unique and really important. So thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks to all of you guys. This has been really great.
Thanks, Julie.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.
Bye.